From boyhood obscurity to the center of the world's darkest stage, Hitler's mind became a laboratory of control, fear, and distorted morality. He didn't wake up evil. He was shaped by relentless comparison, social rejection, and the hunger for significance. The logic of his decisions was hidden beneath charisma and discipline, luring millions to obey ideas they would otherwise reject. Hitler's formative years were punctuated by criticism, rigid authority, and the death of his father. Each insult and failure planted seeds of inadequacy and obsession with order. The desire for control became a survival strategy, not a choice. Early emotional wounds hardened into a psychological framework that would later justify extremes as rational solutions. Isolation and social alienation intensified Hitler's craving for belonging. He observed groups and societies as a detached spectator, craving inclusion but fearing vulnerability. This duality, longing and repulsion, created a cognitive distortion, the belief that the masses needed his vision and only he could deliver order from chaos. Rejected from art school and constantly humiliated, Hitler developed a compulsion to prove significance. Ordinary setbacks were magnified into existential crises. His sense of destiny intertwined with moral righteousness, creating the internal logic that destruction could be necessary for progress. Ideas became weapons. Anti-Semitism, nationalism, and social Darwinism were not just beliefs, but psychological shields. They simplified moral dilemmas, framed blame externally, and justified aggression as logical problem-solving. For Hitler, ideology was clarity born from trauma, fear, and obsession. Hitler's power wasn't brute force, it was persuasion. He read crowds like instruments, manipulating emotions with tone, gesture, and narrative. This ability to project authority masked inner insecurity. Millions obeyed because the illusion of certainty is more compelling than truth, and he learned to exploit that tension effortlessly. Chaos triggered panic. Structure gave power. Hitler's mind equated control with safety, and anyone or anything threatening that order became an enemy. His perfectionism wasn't just aesthetic, it was existential, a psychological armor against perceived weakness, and it demanded obedience from all who surrounded him. Killing, oppression, and deception were mental exercises in problem-solving. Empathy was selectively muted. The human cost became abstract numbers and symbols. Harm could be necessary if it advanced his vision. Hitler's mind compartmentalized moral conflict, creating a world where evil felt logical and righteous. He understood that people obey ideas that feel shared. Propaganda amplified fear, loyalty, and conformity. Hitler's mind exploited peer influence. Collective belief reinforced personal authority. Obedience wasn't imposed. It was suggested, echoed, and internalized by millions, making moral resistance psychologically invisible. Every perceived threat became proof of conspiracy. Paranoia sharpened decision-making while isolating empathy. In Hitler's mind, enemies were everywhere. Loyalty was scarce. This constant psychological tension justified extreme control measures and made compromise feel like betrayal, perpetuating cycles of fear, obedience, and aggression. Hitler obsessed over strategy like a compulsive chess player. Every move, every alliance, every betrayal was calculated through the lens of superiority. Tactical brilliance was paired with rigid emotional rigidity. He ignored advice that contradicted his vision. In his mind, victory justified every moral compromise, making destructive decisions feel rational. Fear wasn't just personal, it was an instrument. Hitler weaponized dread to control followers, to unify, and to silence opposition. The psychological logic: fear creates obedience, and obedience sustains power. By internalizing paranoia himself, he mirrored the terror he inspired in others, a feedback loop of psychological dominance. Blame became tangible, simplified, and symbolic. Entire groups were dehumanized, transformed into abstract threats. Hitler's mind turned complex social problems into personal moral battles. Eliminate the enemy, restore order, justify action. Scapegoating wasn't cruelty. It was the psychological tool that rationalized systemic violence. Rallies, speeches, uniforms, every element was designed to hypnotize perception. Symbols amplified authority and suppressed doubt. In Hitler's mind, orchestrated spectacle was not vanity, it was a cognitive weapon, bending emotion and attention toward obedience. The abstract became real, and the real became a symbol to be manipulated. Every action, every law, every decree was recorded in a mental ledger of immortality. Hitler's mind equated survival with historical significance. The drive to be remembered fueled obsession, aggression, and absolute control. To him, moral cost was irrelevant. What mattered was permanence, a psychological echo of childhood need for recognition. As power grew, so did isolation. Surrounded by sycophants, Hitler's mind filtered dissent until only agreement remained. This psychological echo chamber amplified paranoia, distorted reality, and normalized extreme beliefs. The more insulated, the more logical every ruthless action seemed. Every adversary, real or imagined, became a mental fixation. Hitler's thinking revolved around opposition, plotting, and moral superiority. Obsession simplified complexity and justified cruelty. The enemy had to be destroyed, their destruction rationalized as necessary. Psychological closure demanded action, no matter how devastating. In Hitler's mind, harm and morality existed in separate compartments. Emotional empathy was selectively muted. Intellectual rationalization dominated. Killing millions, orchestrating destruction. These were not moral failures, but solutions to imagined chaos. The mind can justify anything if guilt is segregated into a mental box. Hitler constantly forced reality to fit vision. Facts that contradicted his plan were minimized, ignored, or reframed. This cognitive distortion reinforced the illusion of control, making risky or destructive decisions feel necessary. In his mind, reality was negotiable, morality secondary, and victory the ultimate arbiter. By the 1930s and 40s, Hitler's psychological patterns had become society-wide instruments. Fear, conformity, and ideological obedience spread like infection. His inner compulsions had externalized. The world around him mirrored his distorted cognition. The mind that created terror had also engineered its acceptance, a chilling reflection of human susceptibility. Hitler understood that a single idea, repeated, could control millions. Words, images, and rituals became psychological levers. Obedience was not enforced, it was cultivated. Minds bent to a single vision because repetition normalizes extremity, and social proof makes moral resistance feel abnormal. Concepts of racial purity and societal perfection weren't just ideology, they were cognitive obsessions. They provided a mental structure where chaos could be conquered and dissent punished. Every deviation from the ideal was a personal affront, requiring swift, logical correction in his mind. Empathy was highly selective. Those aligned with his ideology were valued, the rest abstracted into symbols or numbers. Hitler's mind normalized cruelty through dehumanization. Moral blindness was not absence of morality, but a misalignment of it, calibrated to justify extreme action in service of a perceived higher purpose. Hitler's ability to mesmerize audiences reinforced his own distorted confidence. Every cheer, salute, and echoing chant validated his vision. Psychologically, feedback loops amplified delusion. Obedience from others reassured him that his moral framework was correct, cementing cognitive distortions. History wasn't a narrative to learn from. It was a canvas to paint his vision. Hitler's mind rewrote events, justified actions, and shaped a self-image of inevitability. Past failures became lessons for control. Past victories became evidence of genius, and moral cost was irrelevant to legacy. As Hitler's inner circle shrank, dissenting voices disappeared. Psychological isolation strengthened his rigid worldview, making extreme measures feel necessary and rational. The mind can magnify fears when surrounded only by affirmation, turning moral compromise into a perceived duty. Every action was justified as a solution to a problem only he perceived. Logic replaced conscience. Ideology replaced empathy. His mind reframed atrocities as preventative or corrective measures. The darker the act, the more logical it became in his internal narrative. Despite outward confidence, Hitler's mind harbored deep insecurities. Each decision was both a compulsion and a gamble, with fear of failure amplifying extremism. Paradoxically, vulnerability and ego combined to drive actions that seemed invincible externally, but were psychologically fragile internally. The ultimate power came from the spread of his internal distortions into society. Millions internalized fear, ideology, and obedience as normal. Hitler's mind became a psychological ecosystem. Individual pathology expanded into collective behavior, a chilling example of how one distorted mind can manipulate mass cognition. Understanding Hitler's mind isn't about fascination with evil. It's a mirror. You can see how fear, obsession, and distorted logic quietly influence human behavior. Reflect. Which mental traps are you vulnerable to? Recognize them before they shape your choices, because insight is the first step toward resistance.